Hi, everyone. How are you? How's everyone? Oh, so good to see you. It's been a week since I have seen you, and I'm delighted to be back. I truly am. I'm delighted to feel a little better and to be back. Had a shot of cortisone in my shoulder yesterday, although it takes a few days to work. Today, I do have more movement and less pain, so that's a very good thing. So I'm glad that I could do this. Arlene, I owe you a phone call. I haven't forgotten that. Got a little busy today. I'm Clyde. I miss everybody too. So I'm really glad that you are here. Yeah, I hope it's a good session. I'm going to try to inject some, let's see, history, logic, and understanding into, hey, Sam, into the conversation, into the national conversation that is being had about the pulling down of the statues and monuments that we are seeing all across the nation. And like everything in this country, it has a very long history. It has a lot of opinions. There are passionate arguments on both sides, but the majority of the arguments are not based on history. They're based solely on an opinion of what people feel just in their immediate lives, and they don't really understand. And I really believe that. I really believe that if people understood the history more, their opinions would change. Because when you understand the facts, right? The facts, it's the facts. The opinion is it's not my opinion on something, it's the facts of it. And as you know, I'm on staff at the New York Historical Society, so I do believe that I have an understanding of the facts that may be a little bit different, or not even different, but maybe a little bit more in depth. So let's look at this with logic and understanding the facts of this, because then once we understand the facts, then we can think about what we're really talking about, what we're really saying when we're telling people that they're pulling down the statues and they're ruining the country, or they're trying to erase the white race, or whatever it is that they think that is happening, because that's not in fact what is happening. Okay, so let's take a look at it, and I want to hear everybody's opinion. Well, I guess I do. Yeah. I want to hear everyone's observations as we go through. So first off, my friends, is a very important picture we start with. And this is the picture. This painting is the cornerstone of teaching the American Revolution. And it's called Pulling Down the Statue of King George III. And it took place, the pulling down of the statue of King George took place in Lower Manhattan, in Bowling Green, which the area is still there today, and it has the same gate around it that it had when the people went into the Bowling Green area downtown, and they pulled down the statue to show that they no longer looked at King George as the leader of the colonies, that they wanted to be free of tyranny, that they wanted to create their own government, a self-government, a democracy based on the Greek notion of democracy, demo, kratis, people power, democratis. A democratic society is one in which the people are able to voice opposition, they're able to protest, and they went in and they took down that statue. Now, we still have the tail of that statue at the New York Historical Society, and I cannot tell you how much students and adults and everyone alike love seeing the tail. And it's right under the painting. And once we do an inquiry, hashtag, my hashtag looking is learning, once they start to, I never tell them what the painting is about. They tell me what the painting is about, because when you look, you learn. Yay! See how that goes? So if you were to ask a fifth grader or a fourth grader about pulling down this statue, they would say to you, of course we pulled it down. We didn't want the tyranny of King George. We did not want taxation without representation. And they'll tell you what that means. That means all of our tax money is being sent to England to pay for the wars that King George and the massive colonization that he's gotten himself involved in. And the taxes aren't staying in the colonies to help with infrastructure. They will tell you that. How do I know that? They tell me on a daily basis. And you know what else they tell me, which I find remarkable? Hi, David. Good morning and good evening. I saw a lovely picture of yours just now on Facebook, the blue heron, beautiful. What they tell me is also, they say, Miss Cheryl, I have an observation. Look in the left corner. There looks to be Native Americans. And I say, well, what tells you that? Well, they're dressed in traditional Native American clothing. They're carrying a spear. And that's very interesting. What does it tell you that they're in the corner of the painting? Well, Miss Cheryl, they're not only in the corner, they're in the dark. What do you think the artist, is saying about their future in America? Where is the light coming from? Then they'll tell me there's fires in the background. We have this beautiful discussion based on observation, and they are so proud that the patriots have pulled down the statue of King George, and those people right in the center of the picture, those well-dressed men are our founding fathers, my friends, and even over to the right in that area where the wires are, and the ropes that's pulling down the picture, you can even see an image of the general himself, George Washington. This is the basis of democratus, people power, and the beginning of the American Revolution. And then I asked the students, who wants to be a loyalist and who wants to be a patriot? No one wants to be a loyalist. Everybody wants to be a patriot. Everybody wants a piece of pulling down that statue, because that's our history. And then I tell them, what do you think happened to that statue? Besides the tail being right here at the Historical Society. And then, my friends, one other thing I do when I go and visit schools, we have a replica tail, and it is massive. None of the other educators or staff members of the museum, curators, bring it to the schools. But guess who does? That's right, I do. I carry it to the schools so the kids can see it. Yeah. Yup. Leave it to the kids, Arlene. They get it. Right? And so then I tell them, my friends, I say, you know what? Oh, and I have them here, but I'm not going to get the statue was melted down and it became musket balls. So literally, the patriots shot the loyalists with the statue of King George that they pulled down. Yay! Go America! Yay for the revolution. That's our history. It's right there. It's right there. Who wants to see the statue of King George in Bowling Green today? Nobody. Nobody would want to see that. So let's fast forward to another great time in our history, the Civil War, and most specifically the end of the Civil War, and a time frame called Reconstruction, or as I like to talk about it, failed Reconstruction. Reconstruction was going very well for about 3 to 4 years after the Civil War. Reconstruction was going well for African Americans. They had made tremendous gains. They built churches. They built their own schools. They created their own books for learning. They were really creating their own communities. They either fled the South and came up to the northern states where they created amazing places in our cities, especially Harlem. They also created several statesmen and congressmen, and so they were thriving. But the South was not going to lose. It didn't want to lose. It didn't want to. So they talk about this notion of the South. They come up with this notion called the lost cause. I'll get back to the other slide. My friends, this is a Currier and Ives print. Yes, I know, Courier and Ives, Apple Pie America, right? Yeah, like Saturday Evening Post. Yeah. And Courier and Ives does this print called The Lost Cause. And The Lost Cause is a movement to really recreate the glory days of the Confederacy. And the South is going to rise again. It's going to rise again. And it is a movement, and it's a pseudo-historical period, and it's really important to understand that the images that come out of the lost cause for this way of saving the Southern way of life is not about saving the way of life in terms of fashion. It's not a way of saving Southern life in terms of the gentility and being kind to your neighbor. No, it is analogous to, let's save, why don't we all understand that the Holocaust was a horrible thing, and thankfully justice prevailed, and we got Hitler out. But don't you think the Third Reich, they had moments? Didn't they have great moments? Didn't they have a great culture? Let's revive that culture. Let's get Himmler in a statue. No, you don't do that. The Third Reich will rise again. No. But in America, we see this tremendous movement called the Lost Cause. And I want to read you a little bit about it because it's very important. And the Lost Cause is when the KKK rose, and it's the Jim Crow South and the Jim Crow images and the images of blackface that begin in the North with the character of Jim Crow. Okay? One particularly intense period of the Lost Cause actively was around the time of World War I. So we are seeing far-reaching history here. As the last Confederate veterans began to die and a push was made to preserve their memories, a second period occurring during the civil rights movements, we see a reoccurrence continually. So failed, we see that right after 4 years after the Civil War, then after World War I, when we're losing the last of our Confederate soldiers, then the Civil Rights Movement, and guess, lo and behold, Black Lives Matter. Yes. So in the Civil Rights Movement of the 1950s and 60s, in a reaction to the growing support for racial equality, because that little black girl wanted to go to school with all of her white compatriots. And then, no, we're going to close off those schools. The Saturday Evening Post, right, even did a painting about it, right? Through activities such as building prominent Confederate monuments and writing school history textbooks, the Lost Cause movement sought to ensure policies such as Jim Crow. In this manner, white supremacy is a characteristic of the Lost Cause narrative. The Lost Cause narrative typically portrayed the Confederacy's cause as noble and its leadership as exemplars of old-fashioned chivalry. Well, sir, you can still open a door for me, but you show me a Confederate flag and I will personally knock you to the ground. I will. Who were defeated by the Union armies through a numerical and industrial force that overwhelmed the South's superior military skill and courage. Proponents of the Lost Cause movement also condemned the Reconstruction that followed Civil War, claiming that it had been a deliberate attempt by the Northern politicians and speculators to keep the South down. No, we're not trying to keep the South down. We're trying to keep the South humane. Humane. If these are, as my son so beautifully said it, if John Calhoun, whose monument was up in the middle of South Carolina, in the middle of Charleston, and as I was there, as you know, a lot of you, I went to Dylann Roof's trial, and to walk through this park and see this monument face down at you, this man, the most important thing about Calhoun as a vice president was how vehemently He opposed the end of slavery. How vehemently and passionately, how passionately he was for the institution of enslavement, of slavery. So you are in South Carolina, and I think I told you this on the Magnolia Plantation, I met African Americans still living on the plantation who are descendants of the slaves that live there. Wonderful people. And this is what you have to look at every day. I don't know about you, but if I were African American, I wouldn't want to look at this. If I were Jewish, I wouldn't want to look at a statue of Himmler or Hitler, right? So this statue was all about power, of saying the South will rise again. This is a man full of hate. This is not an American to be proud of. America has a tremendous amount to be proud of. But we will never truly understand how much we really have to be proud of until we face our horrific past, humble ourselves to learn our history, and to say, that does break my heart. I don't want my fellow Americans, people who suffered so greatly for this country, to continue to have to suffer in this way. Yes, let's remove this. Let's replace it. Let's replace it with something that truly we can be proud of and truly we can all agree upon, right? It's not that difficult. No one is trying to, and I heard people talking about this, and you know I can't even be on Facebook anymore. One woman was saying we're trying to end the white race. No one's trying to end the white race. No one's trying to end any race. We are human beings. We are all Americans, and we should all want to see the monuments of this country be something that every single American can feel pride over, not one that is so heinous that just the look of this man scares people, because their history is different from our history. I find it very, very interesting these days when I hear a lot of white people talk about what is racism and isn't racism, in the same way that I would never discuss what I feel may be anti-Semitic and what a Jewish friend of mine says is anti-Semitic. They know better than I do. I am not Jewish, so I don't truly understand it. I am not African American, so I truly don't understand it. We have to understand that that people that someone like this wanted to decimate has a different understanding of history than we do, and the treatment they're receiving today. This is another image of the lost cause, that Confederate soldier, just brokenhearted because, you know, Sherman went in to Tecumseh. Sherman went in and it was scorched earth. And we can all agree that it was the bloodiest of wars, and it took a tremendous fight for the South to give up. And it was scorched earth and it was awful. But what they're mourning here, and what this lost cause, they're conflating the issues, and then generation after generation says things like, well, I don't understand why the Confederate flag is so bad. That was my flag. Yeah, in the same way that the Nazi symbol was on a flag and it's no longer used. Oh my God, when we see that symbol, what we all feel, the horror, the degradation, the murder, the genocide, what we feel as a people, that's what we should be feeling because that's how African Americans are feeling, and that's their history in this country. And we need to rise up and say we understand. I want to read you a little bit about the daughters of the Confederacy, because they were very, very also prominent in this. So let's see. The Lost Cause portrayed the South as more adherent to Christian values than the allegedly greedy North. It portrayed slavery as a more benevolent than cruel, alleging it had taught Christianity and civilization. Stories of happy slaves were often used as propaganda in an effort to defend slavery, and the United Daughters of the Confederacy, which you're looking at right now, had a faithful slave memorial committee and erected the Hayward Shepherd Monument in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. These stories would be used to explain slavery to Northerners. Many times they are also portrayed slave owners being kind to their slaves. In explaining Confederate defeat, the Lost Cause says the main factor was not qualitative inferiority in leadership or fighting ability, but the massive quantitative superiority of the Yankee industrial machine. At the peak of troop strength in 1863, Union soldiers outnumbered Confederate soldiers by 2-1, and financially the Union had 3 times the bank deposits of the Confederacy. So, I'm going to show a disturbing slide. This is part of history. It is part of this lost cause. I have in no way, shape, or form am I using this language. I am merely showing it. So, here we go. Yes, they are. Yes, I'm going to talk about Teddy Roosevelt in 1 minute. Doesn't it, Arlene, doesn't it make your blood boil? Jean and I, after dinner last night, we sat down and we started watching TV. And I felt this overwhelming. I also had my shot. The shot didn't hurt at all. And I just said to Jean, I started to cry. I said, I feel so sad for African Americans in this country. 400 years and it doesn't end. It just doesn't end. And then I get, people on Facebook telling me, don't you think it's awful? You're an art dealer and the monument's being pulled down. Oh my God. Tear them down and let's acknowledge that we were wrong and let's rebuild. Let's be the people that Teddy Roosevelt, that others thought that we were. And I'm going to get to that in a second. I'm not going to read this out loud because it's too upsetting, but I hope that you can read it. But this is the portrayal of an African American, a slave, with Lincoln. Massa. Yes, Massa. No, Massa. W.E.B. Du Bois. Did he write I Am Not Your Negro? Or was it, I may have gotten the wrong name, sorry. But it's this type of notion that the lost cause says, well, they're treated well. I treat my dog well. I own my dog. He's a dog. Yes, I treat him well. But I'm allowed to own a pet. Right? You can't just, we made them Christians. How do you have the right to make anybody anything? Well, how do you have the right to make anybody anything? Why is it that this nation seems to feel that Christianity is the only religion? Why is that? Why do you get to decide? And so you have this entire notion, this lost cause, and this propagation of material out there. And people don't even realize the propaganda and how much they are being manipulated. And every time there's a gain, the civil rights movement, World War I, Black Lives Matter, you see the conversation happening again. But now something has changed. Something has changed. And people have had enough in a different way. And so what we see now is we actually see these statues coming down. And they are not making our country ugly by bringing the statues down. They are bettering it, because I am telling you, my friends, we are better than that. As Americans, I know that we are better than that. And Teddy Roosevelt's family came out recently, 2 days ago, and said, take down the statue. This man stands for so much more. This is the president that created the national parks. He was so sure that America, that along with Benjamin Franklin, that the beauty of America lies in its land, right? Not necessarily in the museums like in Europe, but in its land. And yet this statue shows him with a naked African American and a Native American under him. So again, let's do Miss Cheryl's hashtag looking is learning. When I ask my students, what do they see? Again, I could do this from kindergarten all the way up to my Columbia University students, and they will tell me, Miss Cheryl, I see a really strong man on horseback. Yeah. And he's a leader. Yeah. Teddy Roosevelt. And he was virile, right? He was athletic. Even at 55 years old, one of my son's favorite quotes, my son is really into history, and one of his favorite quotes is Teddy Roosevelt going into the Amazon jungle, saying it's his last time to be a boy again. He always loved this kind of adventure. Now, then they'd say to me, but look how tall he is on the horseback. And look how small the people look next to him. And look how the horse is going forward. He's in a step, a trot, or a gallop. He's moving forward off the platform. But they're staying behind. They're not part of that leadership. Yeah, that's exactly right. So this statue has come down. It's come down already, and I will always tell you how proud I am to live in New York. We have our issues. This country has its issues. And I'm still proud. I'm still proud to be in this country. I'm proud to be an American, even with all its issues, because I know so well that when we really look at who we are and what we, as humans, how fallible, that we can get to a better place. And that better place is pulling down these statues. So what they did was they named the Hall of Biodiversity after Theodore Roosevelt. And if you've been to the Hall of Biodiversity in the museum, you know how fabulous it is. And they will do something else out front. And so now when I think about my good friend Dion and my good friend Akua and all my students that I love so much, and I think that as they walk by the the Museum of Natural History, they will no longer have to look at themselves as this kind of quote unquote African-American savage figure. No. We all are equal, and we all need to address this, and we need to stand up and say, this has to change. It has to change. And if that means some statues get pulled down in the meantime, well then so be it, my friends. So be it. Because honestly, if it makes you feel, if you look up at a statue like this and it reminds you that your ancestors' lives were so horrific during the enslaved period and Reconstruction and afterwards, and especially during the enslaved period, that you would rather live in a swamp. There were so many African Americans, enslaved people, that escaped the plantations to live in swamp areas that were so dangerous. The amount of snakes, if that is that frightening an image, it does not belong in America today. And if, as white people, that image isn't frightening to us, so be it. We don't understand history. It's frightening to me. Hello, Marielle Bisson. Thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you here. I owe you an email too. But if it's frightening for someone else, I want it down. Because there but for the grace of God, my grandparents and great-grandparents weren't systematically raped and beaten and owned and traded and enslaved and families broken apart. No. But others, Americans, were. So if that, I am not proud of that. I am not proud of that statue. I don't want it down. And I also want to say that I don't know, even that I feel like I do know quite a bit. I don't even know enough viscerally, empirically, to know what it feels like to have a John Calhoun who, if he were alive today, would rather see slavery in the South or anywhere in this country. What that must feel like for a people to have that staring down at them. We don't want that. As fellow Americans, do we want that? No, we are best when we're united. We're at our best when we're strong together. I sound like a campaign. Oh my God. This is what Roosevelt, the family, wants him to be known for, to be thought about, not for him to be standing. Oh, thank you, Mariella. To announce that there must be no criticism to a president is not only unpatriotic and servile, but is morally treasonable to the American public. So if we can't criticize statues that are propaganda, that any other nation who has dealt, and every nation has their serious, I'm not saying America's the worst, I'm not saying it's better, I'm saying every nation on earth has extremely serious human rights issues. But you don't see many swastikas in Germany, huh? On the national level. And that's what we mean. If we can't discuss this and eradicate it, then who are we as Americans? Nothing but the truth should be spoken about him or anyone else, he says, but it is even more important to tell the truth, pleasant or unpleasant, about him than anyone else. And I'd like to expand that to also all of these monuments and all of these people that through a systematic racism, that's what it means, we are talking about this lost cause that systematically went about with this narrative at this time frame in history that creates the rise of the KKK, the Confederate flag, and Jim Crow era, imagery. So recently they said that they're going to take the image of Aunt Jemima off. Yes, Sam, public art represents all of us, therefore we need to do better. We need artists to take this over, not this committee of who are these women, the Confederate whatever. No, we need artists like Mariella Bisson. We need artists like all of you to get out there with your work and to say this represents all of us. And you're right, we can do better. I was just saying something about the lost cause. Now I can't. Going back to pulling down the statue. It is our history. It is our legacy. It's what we feel so much pride for. So we have so many people in this country to feel pride and to feel great pride about. Put up a statue about them. I'm sure there are people that we can find. Or don't put up a statue about people. Put up a statue about ideas. Put up a statue about beauty. Show some art. Do something different. But until we come to terms and understand the history of how painful this is for people and should be for all of us, we'll continue to have this ridiculous conversation of how dare they? How dare they take down this statue? And this is anarchy. And this is, no, it's not. It's right there. It's our roots, pulling down the statue of King George. Yeah. The erasing of history moves the opera. Well, Clyde, I'm not saying to erase history, but you have to tell both sides of it. You do not need, we are not erasing history, Clyde, and this is something that people are getting very mixed up with. John Calhoun does not need to be in the middle of the park in Charleston, South Carolina, where there is such white supremacy there, and this man is revered for his views on slavery. It's the wrong statue. He doesn't need, look at the size of this statue. In and of itself, let's do Miss Cheryl's hashtag looking is learning. In and of itself, the height of it, the way he's looking down, and I know, Clyde, that you wouldn't, if I were to say to you, what if let's put Hitler on a statue like that? Because we don't want to erase history. And I know, Clyde, you're not saying that. But that's what it is. That's what it is. That's what it is. We would never do that. We would never do that. Ever, ever, ever. We will not. I know you do. We will never. We need to start understanding history better. So everybody right away needs to understand why Reconstruction failed. Look at the lost cause. Look at the propaganda. the South will rise again. No, the South will not, the enslaved South will not rise again, but as better South can. And if you just let this, if you let it, if you come to terms with it, the Confederate flag has no place in this country. Truth and yes. I'm not sure the radicals are erasing all of them without education, because I can tell you here in New York, we're not, you have to look at what they're erasing. I mean, you can take down the statues and you can create a history that is more encompassing, like the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University. Woodrow Wilson was an incredible rapist, incredible racist. Now he did, yeah, these are statesmen too, but let's tell the full story. Every time you name a building, every time you build a statue this tall and this high, and you don't, it's just reverence. Statues are that, they're reverence. Let's think about statues during the Renaissance, my friends. What are statues in the Renaissance? They're reverence. The crucifixion, the Madonna, it's reverence. There's no questioning. There's ideology, right? So we have to start to tell the full picture. But what if, oh, thank you, Arlene. I'm very upset about this. I'm very upset about this and have been for a long time. And a lot of it is because I know art so well. And I love art so much. And I know what artists are capable of. And I know the history, and I just, Clyde, I'm not sure I'm understanding what you mean about what's happening today is after World War II. Because there's the people who are the protests, and then there's the vandals. And I think what's happened is we've focused a lot on the vandalism in order to not talk about the protests. The protests, you're allowed to protest, and you must protest, and we will see a lot of change from this. But I want you to think of somebody that would mean that if you had to look at on a daily basis, 15 feet high, and the world was revering it, revering them and not knowing why, and you knew that they were responsible for horrific crimes against humanity, what would you do? What would you do? Yeah, the vandals, Clyde, I agree with you. The vandals bother everybody, but we cannot mix up. And again, it's like the lost cause. We're no longer talking about slavery. We're no longer talking about the truth of that war. We're now talking about, but the poor South and the culture around the Confederacy. So we're no longer talking about Black Lives Matter and the notion of this movement. We're talking about the vandals. We have to be very, very careful. Yeah, I do you think artists need more courage than a few years ago? I think artists need courage all the time. I think artists have tremendous courage. I think they have tremendous courage. And I love the work that artists do. And I think that that's the work. I mean, when we think about an FDR, right, and the Works Project Administration and the works that were created through that kind of effort in our country, that's feeling like what a way to revive our country if we're in an economic downturn in terms of COVID and such. What a way to revive this nation both economically and visually. Let's replace these monuments. Let's get a committee of people together who care about history and care about their fellow Americans. And let's tell the full story. But it's time for them to go. Because it was time for King George to be taken down in Bowling Green. Yeah? And we have the founders right there at the base of that sculpture. Right there. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, and my connection with museums and my connection with the museum, you're absolutely right, Arlene. And, when you are working, the fascists were banned in Europe and now it has reemerged with the younger generation. Yeah, I can't really speak to that so much. Yeah, I think I just want to keep it for myself, Clyde, because I just can't speak to that intelligently enough at this moment. But I'm very connected to museums. As you know, I work in several of them, my own work of placing artists in collections. And I've placed some difficult work, my friends. Sam Mariquin asked a minute ago whose work this is. This is an artist, Jong Hung Tu. Okay? I own this piece. I'm very proud to own this piece. And I have to tell you something. Early on, Jong Hung Tu did a piece called The Last Banquet. And it was based on Leonardo's Last Supper. And it was all the images of Mao Zedong as Jesus, as every figure in the Last Supper. And people came out and called it blaspheme and everything else. And we were at the Corcoran Gallery in Washington, I think it was. Is it the Corcoran Gallery? Anyway, it got censored out by Senator Kennedy, being Catholic and such. And I ended up placing it. It's in people's homes right now. St. Louis, it's a gorgeous piece. So, what Hung Tu wanted to do was he wanted to create this cross-cultural dialogue within art, with Chinese art, and the masters like Leonardo. But all the images of Mao Zedong, he wasn't saying that he wasn't making fun of Jesus or the Last Supper. He was saying that this man both betrayed himself and his people. He was all of these figures. He was so omnipresent. So I am a dealer who early on I could place very, very, very difficult work. And I think that we all can. I think that dealers are, Mariella Bisson has phenomenal work. And she's got a dealer in North Carolina that her gallery in North Carolina is nothing short of brilliant, the way they work for her. So the dealers, the gallerists, the curators, all of us, we would love to sit at a table and say, what do we want the future of this country to look like? What artists can be there, right? Let's get that conversation going, just like we do in museums. Let's get that conversation going. Yeah. I don't know anybody that's not anti-fascist. But I don't think that pulling down statues, I feel so strongly. When I was in South Carolina and I was going to the Dylan Roof's trial, I was the only person that showed up at Dylan Roof's trial besides the family of the victims of the church, Mother Emanuel Church. And I tell this story all the time. The press was sitting all the way in the back. And the press said to me, oh, go sit up in the front. So I was sitting right behind Dylan Roof. I didn't even realize I was sitting behind him until he came out. And he was shackled and he had his prison garb on. And I looked into the eyes of a neo-Nazi, white supremacist murderer. And I'll never forget it. I'll never forget what that felt like. I was sick to my stomach. But on the other side, on the prosecution side, or there's the families of those victims who lost their lives in that massacre, which was 5 years ago. And I didn't understand at the time that sitting behind Dylan Roof made me look like his family member. And yet when we left the courtroom for a recess, every single family member from the victim side said hello to me. Said hello. They were just so beautiful and so kind. And then I went back that day to talk to the judge because the judge asked if anybody objected to something, and I objected to them having a closed court. And none of the press would speak. And the press kind of said to me, the South Carolina press, you go, you do it. I'll do it. The night before that, we were walking home. We were walking past that park with the Calhoun Monument. And all of a sudden, it got dead quiet in town. We were walking back to our hotel. and you could hear a rumble in the distance. And then at least 200 motorcycle riders, all with now, which seems odd then, with masks to hear, bandanas, black jackets, and a flag on the back, an American flag, rode through town, ran all the red lights, and continued to gun their motorcycles. And I realized at that moment that this was the Klan, that they were telling people to not show up at this trial the next day. So I got there early the next day, and the National Guard was there. No one was there. There were blockades and everything. No one was there. I was there. And when I walked back home, and went home to the hotel after that, after I talked to the judge, and I was shaking when I was talking to the judge, because I'm standing there talking to the judge with a white supremacist. I mean, really evil right there. Walking past that Calhoun monument, I thought, where are we living? Where am I living? I mean, South Carolina is visually gorgeous. The South wasn't built just on the backs of slaves. It was built in the brains of the enslaved. Only they could figure out how to deal with this low table water. Coming from South Africa, from the west coast of Africa, they understood low table water. They understood how to do the work. And yet still today, this is how we are treating Americans. I know we can do better. I know we can. And I just ask anybody that has strong opinions about our country losing its history, or our country losing its white culture, or our country not looking beautiful anymore, and that the importance and the reverence of these monuments, please understand who we're talking about in the monuments, and let's figure out a better way so that we can share this land together with all Americans feeling empowered and good about themselves, right? Yeah. That's my smart start for this evening. You guys, Gene made the most incredible chicken. He's cooking it now. It's been sitting for hours in a feta cheese and like a lemon peel, something or other. It's amazing. So I'm wondering if I'm not seeing for some reason more of your chats, but for some reason it's only showing me this much. But I thank you. I thank you all. I also understand I'm quote unquote preaching to the choir. I do. I understand. But yeah, we can all have a stronger conversation now. Yeah, you could say, look up taking down the statue of King George III. It's our history. Yeah, it's the American way. How do you like that? It's the American way. So my friends, I'm so glad to be back. I had this shot. My shoulder, I have a torn rotator cuff with as the doctor said, one of the worst frozen shoulders. He says it's one thing when a patient can't move their shoulder. It's another thing when he can't move the patient's shoulder. So I got this shot. And it was only yesterday, but I'm already feeling some loosening up. I still have pain, but not as great. So I will continue to be back here. Yes. So thank you all for joining me. I'm hoping we're enjoying the YouTube, because I can't right now. I can't be a part of the conversation on Facebook, and it's very hard to see the level of ignorance, because I'm so sure, I really am hopeful about humanity. And I'm so sure that if we were to all be educated like I do with my kids and adults, we would feel differently. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I'll see you tomorrow evening. I think I'd like to curate something. Yeah? I don't know. Let's think about that Mariella Bisson. Yeah. Yeah. Not good, right, David? I agree. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.